Welcome everyone. Today we have a privilege to host Professor Vartan Kurtcouglu, the head of the interface group at University of Zurich. Vartan is also full member of the Zurich Kidney Center and accredited professor in the Department of Mechanics and Process Engineering at ETH Zurich. Hi Vartan.
Hi Lukasz, nice to be here.
Nice to meet you. So today we will try to cover some aspects of modeling in the context of high data volume, high, let's say, complexity. And then we will also try to maybe discuss a little bit about the impact of AI on teaching and also on on your research. How do you see the trends and how things are moving? So maybe we can start with the introduction of the interface group. What do you do?
Yes, so the interface group, it's a group at the interface, as the name says, of engineering, medicine, and biology. So what we try to do there is to really take the information from all these different spheres and bring them together. Because as I've experienced in the past, if you stay in your research silo, you miss developments in other areas. More crucially, you miss tools, you miss viewpoints. And so with that goal of being at the interface to, at the end, do something that helps patients. So that's the end goal. On the way there, we do basic research, of course, but that is the end goal. And our research is in the area of fluid dynamics and solute transport inside the human body. That's what we like doing, and that's where our expertise is. So fluid dynamics in the human body can quite well relate to blood flow. That's a typical one, and what happens when this blood flow gets interrupted. So for example, a coronary artery, those are the vessels that supply the heart, are blocked, then this leads to a heart attack. If you have blockage in an artery in the brain, then that's a stroke. Question is then, how do you prevent it? What are the biological processes that lead to that? Or if it has happened, if you have a narrowing, how can you reduce this narrowing? And the tools that we already have in the clinics, how can you improve them? So that is the goal. And now in our research, we do both experimental and computational work. So that's why I'm a professor of computational and experimental physiology. And physiology, that's the teaching of how the body works. Solute transport is an important mechanism in the whole thing, because in blood, for example, you have transport of these bad cholesterol that we all know. And that bad cholesterol enters the vessel walls, causes inflammation, and that can lead to plaque buildup. So how does that LDL, the low density lipoprotein, the bad cholesterol, get into those walls? That's something that we would like to capture. And it's a two-way process. The flow influences how the lining of our blood vessels, how tight it is. So if you have any recirculation areas, then this may cause low shear stress. The cells sense that. So it's very, very dynamic process going on.
Yeah, and I can imagine a different variety of complex modeling, because it's not only the flow, but you have to model the erythrocytes, and also you have to somehow model the wall shear stresses
Exactly.
of the blood. So how do you manage to introduce so much modeling into the complex flow systems?
This is actually a very big challenge. So how do you do that, and what model complexity do you need? So on the global scale, if we stay in the blood flow, then you use computational fluid dynamics, a tool that has been well established now. So you're surrounded here by cars, so in automotive industry, in aerospace industry, so that is given. So we can use those. And that's where I was talking about this interface, right? This information or the tools come from engineering, and now you're applying it to biology and to medicine. Once we have that, then it's how do the cells react to it? And then for the cells, we don't have this full understanding, and it's not as simple as the Navier-Stokes equations in fluid dynamics, but now we have to kind of have descriptions of how the cells react. And in biology, the descriptions are mostly qualitative. If you increase this, this thing is reduced. But reduced by how many percent? And percentage is wrong, by how many orders of magnitude? So you try to interface those and see you have a description, maybe more a statistical description, and trying to connect that then to the computational fluid dynamics model. So that's how we try to do it.
So I understand that you have focused, or you are still focusing on the brain, cerebral fluid systems in the brain, and but also on the kidneys. So could you maybe share the most proud moments of that kind of research?
I will take a step to go to the brain, right? So both the brain, the kidney, and of course the heart are very vital organs. So if your kidneys don't work well, this will impact circulation, and this will impact your brain. So that's why if you go towards kidney disease, then you get cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease affects everything, including the brain. So that's why we speak of the kidney, heart, brain axis. In this large project that we had, it was an NCCR, so a national project with many universities in Switzerland involved. The question was about a specific function of the kidney, which was oxygen sensing. And a few years back, a Nobel Prize was given for how body senses oxygen, and it's closely related to the kidney. So the kidney sense oxygen, and as a reaction to that produces this protein EPO. You may have heard of that because of racing, bicycle racing. And if the kidneys don't work, EPO production is reduced, and then back in the day, the kidney disease would kill the patients because of anemia and not because of the rest of the main function of the kidney. So proudest moments in that sense are when we can see that what we do is being slowly translated into clinical application. You mentioned the brain. One current project that we have, which I find quite fascinating, is operations where you have bypass machines. So you have a heart bypass because you want to operate on the heart. So blood is taken from the body, oxygenated, and put back. And our normal flow rate of blood is about 5 liters per minute. So 5 liters per minute have to circulate through this machine. And if you look at your main artery that comes from the heart, the aorta, is rather big. But now, to put something back in there, you have to make an incision in the aorta and put a small cannula in, but still maintain the 5 liters per minute. So you have a very high flow rate going through there. So a jet that's produced, which can then produce suction and pull blood from the brain rather than supplying it. So that's why there are patients in those operations that don't do well afterwards because the brain or the kidneys were undersupplied with oxygen. And here we're trying to improve the cannula design to make this better. And here we use, on the one hand, measurements, so experimental measurements with new cannula designs, but also computational fluid dynamics as we go there. So the effect on the brain, as you mentioned, there's another one. So there's another fluid system in the brain. It's called the cerebrospinal fluid, and that surrounds the entire brain and is contained in brain ventricles. These are little sacs. And lately, this is very fascinating, there's more and more evidence that this fluid removes waste products. So your brain is highly metabolic active. Now, when you're listening to me, you have to think, what am I saying? And when waste products are produced, they have to be somehow removed from the brain. And when this system does not work, it's implicated that this may be a contributor to Alzheimer's disease.
So very, very bold statement. So even when you run the, let's say, CFD simulations, you have the, let's say, geometry of the brain coming from MRI. Can you somehow validate how trustfulness is the let's say the fluid simulation itself? Do you have an experimental technique that is able to actually confirm that your model is valid?
This is a very good question. So for the brain itself, for the fluid spaces that surround the brain, no. That's the answer. And I can put it like this. So if we had a method with which we can actually measure reliably the fluid velocities, then we would not do the computational modeling. But we can't. But there are other areas where we can measure it. So for example, we have one project where we model a ventricular assist device that is basically heart support pump. And there we do particle image velocimetry measurements. And then we try various types of computational fluid dynamics models and see which are the correct settings. Can we trust what we actually model? And then we try to translate from there to a fluid system in the brain that, in terms of the flow features, is easier. But it is correct, you have to have the right experts who do it. And with the CFD, computational fluid dynamics tools, becoming easier to use, anyone can press a button and say, hey, I modeled the flow. And so it's a trust. You trust in the person who's doing the modeling, and when they publish papers, do you know who's done the work?
Yes, and which brings me to the topic of reproducibility. So when you, let's say, publish your model and with all the parameters, so is this natural for other research groups to try to reproduce exactly the same result? How do you manage to share, not only to publish the paper, but also share data based on which you could reproduce the result?
I think this is a very good point. So in the past, and I'm not talking about a decade ago, but just really in the recent past, it was not common to provide all the data. For various reasons, one being, well, you said, I have spent so much time gathering this data, I would like to milk it as much as possible to publish more and more papers. Or your PhD student who's working on it left, and what are you going to do with that? Or you know that nobody else can read them anyway because you've relied on certain commercial tools that not everyone has. Now the mindset has changed generally, so open data is a big thing. And I think especially if you're doing expensive research that is funded, in our case anyway, mostly by the taxpayers, you want this data to be available for others to use. So for small models and small data, it's not a problem. We have various repositories that can be used for that. So Zenoda is a good example. It's associated with CERN, so they have the infrastructure to do that. But for our data sets that go into terabyte, and if you look at the full project into the petabyte range, there's no such thing. You just really can't do it. And I'm not saying we can't, but one cannot do it. If you want to share a petabyte of data at the end, where would you put it? Who would pay for it? So you could say you pay for it during the duration of the project because you get funded for, usually it's 4 years, let's say. But what happens after those 4 years?
Yes, that's a very good point, because I can understand this is technically feasible.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the end, somebody has to pay. But which brings me to another topic of the data fairness.
Mm-hmm.
Fairness, which means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And recently also you have published some best practices for data fairness. And I think this is a valid point and challenge for many R&D organizations, also in the industry, that have to, let's say, not only provide data to the whole organization, but also provide a framework to reproduce some of the experiments, but also track them and optimize them. So what could you maybe elaborate and explain what is your approach?
Yeah, when it comes to experimental data, it's usually less difficult than it comes to computational models, because if you want to be able to rerun a computational model, then you have to make sure that the program is there, and that the operating system is there, and that the computer that the operating system was running is there. Because we use many specialized tools and we are not dogmatic, if I see there's a commercial code available that does what I want, I'm not going to spend the time to reinvent the wheel, because that would distract me from my research. But now that software maybe has been sold to a different company, the license is not there anymore, so what do you do? I think this is really one of the biggest issues. For in-house codes, what we can do and like to do is have Docker, virtual machines and so on, that all in itself is enclosed, so that you reduce the likelihood that it will not run anywhere anymore, as long as those tools are that you would need to run, for example, the virtual machine, are still maintained. That will be the goal. So it's like a plug and play, that the user does not have to go compile anything, because mind you, we are not in computer science, but you're talking about people who are using computers, but they're not computer experts. And even going into, I don't know, just having you say, well, you just have to do this. This just have to is already too much. It has to be like using an app. And if you get it to that level, then it will be reused. If you don't do it, very few people will actually reuse it.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. I agree that with the infrastructure as a code, you could actually encode exactly the setup that the other party should have, and also with containerization, you can reduce the complexity. But how you do it is the different terms, because I mean the models, they have tens, if not hundreds, of parameters, and be able to really reproduce it for the new data set, it's a big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely is.
One of your projects was actually to use X-ray microtomography to actually visualize the entire brain of the mouse with a very high, let's say, resolution of the 0.3 micrometer. So, which is, I think, order of magnitude higher than the previous work. So, could you maybe share more details about this project?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, we started that project on the brain coming from the kidney, where we wanted to map the entire vasculature of the kidney. So entire, I mean really everything. And the reason is that if you want to do computational fluid dynamics modeling, then you want to reduce the number of boundary conditions. And if you just take a small part of the kidney, then you cut vessels and all of a sudden you have many boundary conditions to fill and you can't measure it. So we wanted to be able to enter the kidney in the artery and exit at the vein. So we needed everything. You need a large field of view to fit the mouse kidney and a very high resolution to go to micrometer scale imaging. So that's where we use this ex vivo microcomputed tomography. And then colleagues of ours, or let's say other researchers, had used a microscopy technique. This is light microscopy using 2-photon excitation to look into the brain of the mouse. This is a common tool now. And then you use that tool, you have to open up the skull of the mouse and put a little window in it, but you only see a very, very small part. And you don't see very deep into the brain. And based on solute transport that they saw by injecting fluorescent tracers, they tried to extrapolate from there and make a big story. So this was even in the news. They said you need to sleep on the left or on the right side to make your brain flush those substances that you may accumulate overnight better and so on. But it did not make any sense physically. And so many people have been stating that, have been trying to show alternative interpretations, but it's difficult to get that through. So what you need then to convince is not just your physical understanding. So a computational model is not something that everyone believes in, so you have to measure it. That's why we thought, okay, we're going to go into this synchrotron radiation-based microcomputed tomography, where we can have a high resolution. So there it's not like an ex vivo 0.3, but we can get 4 micrometer resolution, cover the entire brain of the mouse, do very quick scans to see how transport processes work. And that's exactly where we have these large data that we collect. And we have to somehow analyze these data and be able to share that data.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting that the paper that came out based on this very tiny part of the brain was, let's say, having a great noise and probably great publicity, but in the end it was not capturing the physics properly. So I can imagine that if you train any copilot for science on that publications and then impact of it, the answer would be that it is correct.
That's exactly it.
So that's exactly the very nice example of hallucinations that we could see, but only the domain experts like yourself would recognize.
That's an important point. So, because in this case, it wouldn't be hallucination of the large language model. It would be hallucinations of the researcher who have produced the data, right? Yeah. And that shows, again, even more today, where we have this really interconnected world, how important interactions, life interactions are. Because you know from your own experience, depending on who you talk to, it doesn't have to be in a professional setting. This person tells a lot of stories, but you only believe a fraction of it, if any. And the other one, if he or she says it's like this, you know that's going to be true. So I think this is going to become more and more important just because we have now so much data, and the origin of the data is going to be maybe more important than what the data exactly is.
Mm-hmm. the aspect of interdisciplinary research, I think, is super important because people are, let's say, having a domain expertise in a very narrow field of research. So do you believe that in future you can imagine you can work with a Copilot or with AI agents that would do, let's say, some summarization of some research in other fields, or maybe you could ask for some guidance. Do you believe in such a bright future for researchers? Or?
I think the future is already now.
Oh, okay.
So let's say, maybe not in the furthest field, but if I'm looking at something adjacent, and as a researcher, our job in a way is to have new ideas, right? To see where we're going to go. Nobody tells you if you become a project leader or a PI what to do. You have to come up with that, and you have to convince others that it's a good idea to go there. So if I have some crazy idea that is not exactly in my domain, then in the past you had to go to colleagues to ask, does that make sense? And depending on how patient they were, they would say, no, it's a load of crap, or they say, no, maybe. Or you would have to spend a lot of time in literature, only to find out later it was not worth it. Now you can go ask, if you will, ChatGPT and have this interaction with the other, not person, the AI being patient, and you say, okay, I don't need to further pursue that. Or say, hey, there might be something to it. And then, of course, you don't keep trusting the machine, but then you go and you can invest time. So for it as a triage tool, absolutely very, very valuable.
So I guess one of the best strategies not to waste too much time is to fail fast. So this would help to save some time, right? Not investigating things that doesn't make sense. Absolutely, I agree with you. But what about the novelty and about extrapolation? Because interpolation is easy. You can probably, those models could actually do the very good interpolation. But extrapolation is tricky.
For me, and I can only speak for my field at the moment, that is still science fiction.
Okay.
Because, of course, we try again, and the tools develop quite fast. Try again and again to give very, very simple tasks. What you think for you as a human would be a simple task. Be even comparison of 2-3 things that are well summarized. But so far the tools fail. In my experience. I don't know the full field. I cannot say if there's something that's really novel there. But for me, they have not worked so far. Where I see, though, this interaction to be valuable potentially is exactly in this interdisciplinary field. And the reason for that is, let's say if I make a computational model of just what we're working on right now, how ion transport across an epithelial cell in the brain works. I have my student who's working on it, and then I interact with him, say, hey, this is cool, why don't we try this? And not this in the sense of having the model better, but a physiological aspect. Can we probe that aspect? Can we probe this? And that's me interacting with him. And if he wasn't here, I would be able to take the code, and if I sit and invest some time, make it run, and be able to ask the questions myself. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is what happens with real experts on those epithelial cells who are biologists and not computational biologists. So they would have to come, sit with my student, go back and forth, and spend weeks, trying to do this. But what I would want is a tool that's integrated. You have as a back end the model that can be reparameterized, where you can say, okay, I don't want this element to be there anymore, or I want it to be reduced. And then as the domain expert, make this interrogation. If I tell you now, well, it's on GitHub, nobody will touch it. So for you, it's not a big deal. For someone who's not in the field, it's a big deal. So if it's an app, maybe. So you go in the app, then you have your sliders maybe, then you can run it if it's not a big model. But no, that's not how it's supposed to be. The way it's supposed to be is that you have the interface, natural language interface, and you're interacting like you're interacting with the PhD student who wrote the tool. And in the back end, you don't have some extrapolation from AI, which we don't trust at this point. But you have the validated tool where you know exactly how it's built, you know what it represents, you know what the boundaries are. And that, I think, so an expert system, if you will, to operate the back end, which is the more classical computational
Yes,
model.
yes. I also believe in that vision, and I think this is available today. I've seen some examples already where you can actually interact with the natural language with CAD tool, with CAD tool, and then you can ask the tool to mesh it, right? And then to make some corrections, and then to perform some kind of simulations with the specific boundary conditions, and then make some revision of the result. So I think this is coming, which means that less knowledge will be required on the student side or on the expert side, right? They don't have to go deep into the Navier-Stokes equation and fully understand the mass.
But I think this is different, because what you're describing is the operation of it.
Yes.
Right. And you can tell the machine to do something that doesn't make any sense, and it will be carried out. So if you say, I just want to have, I don't know, 5 grid cells in my domain that should have 1 million, then okay, so if you're lucky, it might do something and something comes out and you believe it. But what I would say is that you have to have a validated backend that really works within a certain boundary, within a certain zone. And now you can let the non-experts on it and play around with it. So it has to be protected to trust the output. If it's just exploration, I don't need, if I do CAD, it's faster if I just use my mouse or my keyboard rather than say to the computer, hey, please make that cutting plane. And say, no, that's not what I meant. Go a little bit more right, a little bit more left. Just like when you're talking to a student, say, hey, could you do it at the one end? You say, okay, go to the side. I will go on the keyboard and do it myself.
Yeah, and the student aspect is also very interesting. Do you believe that ChatGPT and LLMs are used on the daily basis by the students trying to, let's say, be faster with their exams, or maybe respond much faster? And how do you feel about judging if is it a LLM based answer that I should score, or is it just a student answered correctly?
I mean, I would get upset if they didn't use LLMs, right? Because why not? So when we had computers, then you say, oh, I'm not going to use computers, I'm going to use paper. It doesn't make any sense. So it's more the burden on the teachers at this point, on the professors. How do you make sure that they're using it in the right fashion, and what are they using it for? And for them to know that you can't trust everything that the LLM tells you. So not only because of hallucinations, I think they've become much better when it comes to that, but just as we said, there are certain paradigms in the literature that may not be correct, right? But because they've been published so many times, it's just rendered it, right? Or if you go into politics, political views that may be rendered, which you don't agree with, I think as a parent, maybe that's even more acute, right? So of course you have people who believe in X, but you would like to instill in your children Y. And similarly with students, you say, sure, there are some people who believe that, but here, this is what we state as a fact. So how do you ensure that? I think that's the more difficult part. And when it comes to examinations, I think we have to rethink how we do those. That's going to be a big problem, or already is a big problem. So one way to learn is based on research papers. You say, look, students, these are interesting research papers. Summarize what you've seen in them. Criticize what is done well, what is not. And now if you have a student who has plenty of other things to do, they can upload it to an LLM, and then you get a wonderful answer. But it didn't help the student because they should have thought about it, right? And biologically, so our brains are trying to minimize work. Makes sense, because to work you need energy. It comes at a cost. And the only way you learn, though, is by investing that energy. So how do you make sure that the students do that?
Yes, and maybe it will bring us to the old times when you have let's say, a interaction with the professor, direct interaction, and also the research integrity will play additional role because it will be very easy to get answers, but it will be much more difficult to ask the right questions. So maybe we will change the curriculum towards teaching students how to ask questions.
So have the right search query or the right prompt for your... Yeah. I think to a certain extent, for sure. We see that. So we use, for example, LLMs and different types or different AI tools for literature search. I think they're very, very helpful for that. I like to think back. So when I was just starting out in higher education, not even in higher education, so in high school, then internet was just becoming a thing, right? And I had one situation that's still stuck in my mind. I had watched a movie at one point. It was an old movie, black and white, a particular scene, and I just wanted to know, what is that movie? And how do you find out? So you could go to the library, but what are you searching for, right? You just don't know. So then I had a user group. I asked a question. Next day I had my answer, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. I would not have been able to do that before. And now that user group has been exchanged by your LLM, you can ask the same question. And we use that, as I said, to get research papers. Find ones that you usually would not have found because you didn't really go down the right path. So for that, I find it's very helpful. But when it comes to knowing something, I think we have a problem with that. So do you want your surgeon, for example, to have the screen open, say, okay, I'm here at the heart now, what should I do next? Or do you want them to be fast and be able to react quickly? So should their neural network be already developed to where they do not need the external one to be reacting fast at this point? And the only way to get there is to really invest the time. So you have to train, you have to think yourself, and we will have a tendency, and I don't exclude myself or anyone else, that if you don't have to do it, you don't do it. And then you use the LLMs or whatever other tools you have. Writing is a good example. Sometimes it's painful to write, right? So you have to write a text, you've written a sentence or two, and you're like, I just don't know how to formulate it correctly, especially if English is not your mother tongue, you have to write in English. And by doing this, you become better at the end. But now you just say, I forget it. ChatGPT, so how can I reformulate it? It gives you 10 options. Like, yeah, this is good. I go to the next one. But you haven't learned. You have produced something which was probably better than what you could have done, but you're not learning.
Exactly. And so on the student level, I think there is a lot of responsibility on the teachers and professors to explain how integrity is important and how to use AI tools in the right way. But what about the grown-up researchers who are, let's say, using the ChatGPT just to publish? And there is a concept of, there is the whole business of paper mills that are just producing papers. Just you pay 5,000 and then you get a paper with a kind of guarantee that it will be published in the peer-reviewed journal. Have you seen, let's say, examples, or maybe you have some awareness about this issue?
Yeah, I think this was also an issue in the past. Now it's become just easier to write those papers. In the past, the journal where you published was very important because there was a certain screening by the editors and then by peer review. And then who was publishing it was important. And now that's becoming more and more important. So if I see a new paper in my field, then ideally I know who those people are. I have met them at the conference. I know how they approach scientific integrity. They say, it's good enough. We can or they say, look, no, it has to be really perfect. So you may find papers that are published in very, what is considered low impact journals, but that have a high value because you know that they have invested the time in making it well. And that's what I go by with, not in the journal. So going to the top journals, they are driven by the need to publish. And if it's a controversial article, great for them, because it will create a buzz, right? So it's not about having it be correct, it's about creating buzz. So it's a publishing business, as it is, rather than a science business.
Yes, yes, and I read a statement from Colin Wright, who was one of the biologists. He said that, let's say, the evaluation system for researchers is not promoting truth, but is promoting, let's say, some KPIs that you have to meet. And do you also see that researchers are measured on the number of publications, citations, and you can trick the system, right? You can.
I would definitely underwrite that, yes.
And what would be your idea for a better metric system that could be based on the, let's say, truth-seeking approach?
It's difficult. I mean, if you have, and I was in that position myself, if you have new applicants for a position, so professors who want to have a position in your faculty, they come present their work, you go through the literature, and it's rarely the case that the entire panel is from that particular area, research area, because you have usually in our research communities now very small areas of real expertise and then dilutes there. So for us to evaluate those applicants without being biased, so if you're exactly in my area and I like you, I may say, hey, this person is great. If I don't, I may even unknowingly, in a biased fashion, say I don't like him. So my colleagues who are not exactly there will say, well, wait, he or she has published quite well. You see that. Are you going to really go into every single research paper and read it in detail, which would take forever? The idea is, yes, that's what we should do. And the new evaluations go in this direction, also from this Swiss National Science Foundation. But I have my doubts that this will work just because of the time investment that it takes.
So I guess this is how it is. There is there was a paper in Nature that was talking about the impact of the research and how it progressed over time. I don't know if you have had a chance to look at this. There is the researchers, they reviewed about 24 million publications and 3 million patents, and then they measured the 3-year window in the terms of how likely this particular paper pushed the science towards different direction that the mainstreaming papers were based on. So the how likely this particular paper was able to break from the past research and just go into the novel. And I can imagine an example of the first paper that was that went into the deep neural networks as opposed to have a reduced number of layers. Do you also and when you look at the plot, they are declining. I mean, those numbers are declining in terms of the impact. Do you also see that we are producing more and more noise or publications with that will have mixed value, as opposed to the past where each paper was highly valued? I'm thinking still about Robert Feynman, and then the first into physics, the papers in physics, the most famous ones.
I guess you could argue if they hadn't made those discoveries, then we would have more papers today that make them, right?
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to say because one argument is also in literature that the low-hanging fruit are gone. And so it becomes more and more difficult to make the next breakthrough. But it's also correct that the sheer number of papers is increasing. And you're publishing also a lot of garbage, must be said. It's easier to publish that because in the past you had to have your printed journal, so there was a barrier to entry there. But now anyone can publish anything that they want, really. It's inexpensive. So yes, it's clear from those papers that we're not going to get any real advances. And the other one, if it's really the, let's say, the low-hanging fruit are gone, or if you're not working as well anymore, that's, who knows.
Yeah, and there's a lot of promises by the AI models that are trained on the more data with much larger scale. And you've probably seen some indications of how efficient they are in very complex problems, even on the PhD student level. In terms of the physics, mathematics, they are able to actually correctly solve some of the problems. So do you think that we can there is a cap on ability for the models to get to the level of the PhD or postdoc, or there are some limitations because of the nature of the research that you have mentioned, personal interactions, constant challenging ideas?
Yeah. So I think when it comes, you had asked about extrapolation and maybe going even beyond extrapolation, going into a new dimension, if you will, right? There, I don't think we're there yet with the AI tools, right? So it's this additional step that I'm not questioning that it probably will happen at one point, but we're not quite there yet. So how do you teach someone to think out of the box? And those are the good PhD students, right? To say, no, I don't want you to just extend what the person before you did, which is already an extension. So it's already an extrapolation, if you will. But I want you to think of something completely new. And for that, we still need the PhD students at this point. If later on we don't, I don't know, then the question will become if the AI will still need us.
Yes, that's a good point. And then, summarizing, what are your next research plans and what would be a success of your initiatives?
So my immediate next step that I would consider success is if we would be able to show, in that particular example that I gave you of the microscopy that only sees a small part, to convince the field that you have to look at the big picture and show that while the results that the researchers show were correct, the interpretation was wrong, and that one needs to really be careful with the interpretation. And why was the interpretation like that? It's because to publish in Nature, in Science, you need to be bold in your statements. They want that. If you just say, hey, we have very neat data, they don't care. So I think this would be a big success for us. And then more on the research side itself, to what we would like to get is if we have better understanding of how these fluid transport processes in the brain work, then this may help identify molecular mechanisms that we can then target, not we, but the field can target pharmaceutically or pharmacologically, and find drugs that may help with the transport, right? And then reduce the age of onset of Alzheimer's disease.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it will mean that your basic research will have impact on the pharmacology potentially, or even on the, let's say, treatment of the Alzheimer's disease.
Yes, absolutely. So it's always nice to see that you do something and then down the road someone's probably citing your papers and that leads to something else. So indirectly we are certain to have an effect, so have an impact. But it's nice to see the linear impact, so that where it goes directly. So that would be a big thing. That's what every researcher wants at the end, right? So to not just have diffuse idea that yes, what I have done has reached the masses, but it has directly reached them.
Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Looking forward to, let's say, find out more about your research. And also thank you all for your attention. We try to cover different aspects of computational modeling, data fairness, and also how AI can impact both teaching and also the research. And I do hope that we have raised some awareness or interest in that aspect. If you would like us to cover other topics, please let us know. We'll be happy to look into the suggestions. And again, thank you, Vartan, for coming here, and looking forward to fruitful discussions in the future.
Thank you, Lukasz. It was my pleasure.